I want to say up front that I still drive past that building sometimes, and every single time I do, I look at the second floor windows. I don't know what I'm expecting to see. Maybe I'm just checking that nothing is looking back. Before we get into the story, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to like the video and share it with your close friends and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from in the comments. Thank you all for the support. It truly means the world to me. Now, let's start. Back in the summer of 2024, I took a night security job at the old Regency Mall in Racine, Wisconsin. If you've ever been through Racine, you probably know the place. It shut its doors for good in 2019, and ever since. The city had been trying to figure out what to do with this massive, empty shell. In the meantime, they needed someone on site from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, mostly to keep out squatters and bored kids looking for a place to drink. That someone was me. The pay was $15 an hour. Not great, but the job was supposed to be easy. My gear consisted of a heavy-duty flashlight, a two-way radio that connected to absolutely no one useful, and a big ring of keys that opened most of the doors. There were a few back offices and a long maintenance corridor near the old food court that my keys would unwork on. My supervisor, a guy named Dale who I only ever spoke to by phone, told me not to worry about those areas. Nothing in there but rats and old grease traps, he said. So, I didn't worry. The first 2 weeks were boring in the best way possible. I'd do my rounds every 90 minutes, walking the exact same loop through the ground floor and then up to the second level. I'd check that all the exterior doors were secure and shine my light into the dark, silent storefronts. It was a bizarre time capsule. A lot of the stores still had their fixtures, like ghosts of commerce past. The old Gab had these headless mannequins lined up against the back wall, which was unsettling in its own quiet way. The massive Sears at the end of the mall had been gutted completely, a cavernous, dark space. But the food court still smelled faintly of teriyaki chicken. And honestly, that disturbed me more than anything else at first. How does a smell like that last for 5 years? It just hung in the air, a greasy culinary ghost. To pass the long hours, I listened to podcasts on my earbuds. I brought a camping chair and set it up near the main entrance, where the old information kiosk used to be. It was my little command center. I'd eat my lunch at 2 in the morning in the lonely glow of my phone screen. It was lonely, yes, but it was fine. It was just a job. The first thing that really bothered me happened during my 3rd week. I was doing my 1:30 round, walking past the corridor that leads to the old Macy's wing. It was dead silent, as always, until I heard it. It was the sound of a shopping cart rolling. Not loudly. Just that quiet, distinctive, rattling wheel sound, like someone was slowly pushing one across the tile floor just around the corner. I froze and listened, and the sound stopped too. I shined my flashlight down the long, dark corridor and saw nothing. The floor was bare. And more importantly, there were no shopping carts anywhere in the building. I'd walked every inch of that place. I shook my head, told myself it was just the old building, settling, the pipes, making noises, and I kept walking. 2 nights later, I found a footprint. A single, clear shoe print, like from a heavy work boot, right in the middle of the second-floor concourse near where a Foot Locker used to be. The dust up there was thick, a fine gray layer covering everything, so you could see every single mark. And this print was fresh. It was pristine. I knelt down and compared it to my own boots. It was bigger, wider, and here's the part that got me. It was pointing in the direction I'd just come from. It was like someone had been walking behind me, and I'd just missed them. I radioed Dale the next morning to report it. He brushed it off, Said it was probably from a building inspector who'd come through earlier in the week. That made a certain amount of sense, except I had walked that exact same stretch the night before and it absolutely was not there. Still, I let it go. But over the next week, things started to accumulate. Small things, but they added up. A door that I was positive I had locked would be unlocked when I came back around on my next loop. I found a half-empty plastic water bottle sitting on the counter of the old Subway restaurant in the food court. The cap was off. The water wasn't dusty. It looked like someone had just set it down. One night, I walked into the first-floor restroom near the main entrance, and one of the sinks was wet. Not just dripping from the faucet. The basin was wet, with little splash marks around it. Like someone had just used it and wiped their hands on their pants. My easy, boring job was starting to feel occupied. I started doing my rounds faster. I stopped wearing my earbuds, wanting to hear every single sound. I started carrying a pocket knife in addition to my flashlight, which I know sounds stupid against whatever could be in there, but it made me feel slightly less helpless. The night that finally made me quit happened on a Thursday, August 8th. I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday, and I'd called her to wish her well right before my shift started. I was doing my 2 in the morning round, and when I reached the second floor, I heard something. It was coming from that locked maintenance corridor near the food court, the one my keys didn't open. It was music. Faint, tinny music, like it was being played on a small speaker or a phone. I couldn't make out the song, but it was definitely music. I crept up to the heavy metal door and pressed my ear against it. The moment I did, the music stopped. And then, I heard breathing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't exaggerated or fake. It was just someone standing on the other side of that door, breathing the way you breathe when you're trying to be completely silent. Controlled. Deliberate. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back from the door. I tried to sound official. Security. Who's in there? My voice cracked, which I'm still embarrassed about. There was no response. Just absolute silence. The breathing stopped. Or maybe whoever it was just got better at hiding it. I fumbled for my radio and called Dale. No answer. I called again. Nothing but static. I wasn't going to stand there a second longer. I went back downstairs to my camping chair by the entrance, and I sat there with my flashlight aimed at the staircase for the rest of my shift. I did not move. I did not do another round. When Dale finally called me back at 6:15, as I was getting ready to leave, I told him everything. The music, the breathing, the feeling of being watched. He just sighed, this tired, long-suffering sound, and said he'd have someone from the day crew check the corridor. He called me back that afternoon. He said they'd found nothing. No one, no speaker, no water bottles, no sign that anyone had been inside that locked corridor. They checked the door and it was still securely bolted. I went back one more night. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't just imagining things, that I wasn't scared. I did my midnight round, and everything was normal. I did my 1:30 round, and everything was normal. At 2:15, I was sitting in my chair near the entrance, trying to read on my phone, when my radio clicked on. It hissed with static at first. Then, a voice came through, chillingly clear. It said, "You left early last time." I was in my car 45 seconds later. I didn't even grab my camping chair. I drove home, my heart pounding in my throat, called Dale, and told him I was done. I quit. He didn't argue. He didn't even sound surprised. I looked up that building recently. They're finally tearing it down this year. Part of me hopes they find something in that maintenance corridor when they do. Evidence, an explanation. But another part of me, a much bigger part, hopes they don't. What I can't stop thinking about is the voice on the radio. It was a closed channel. It only connected to 2 handsets, mine and Dale's. That's it. And Dale was asleep at home. So someone else had a radio? Someone else was in that mall with me. And they knew my routine. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think was happening in that mall? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Stay safe out there. I've told maybe 3 people this story, and every one of them asked why I didn't call the police. I'll answer that now. I had no cell service, no way to charge my phone, and I was 30 miles from the nearest trailhead. When you're that far out, you handle things yourself, or you don't handle them at all. In September 2025, I did a solo section hike on the Appalachian Trail through the 100-mile wilderness in Maine. If you're not familiar, it's one of the most remote stretches of the AT, running from Monson to Baxter State Park. No towns, no road crossings, no cell service for most of it. I'd been planning this hike for 2 years and had done plenty of solo backpacking before. I'm 29, in good shape, and I don't spook easily. Or I didn't. The first 4 days were perfect. Crisp weather, the leaves just starting to turn, hardly anyone else on the trail. I passed a couple of southbounders on day 2 and a trail. Crew doing maintenance near the Chairback Range on day 3, but otherwise, I had the woods to myself. I camped at designated sites, hung my food properly, filtered water from streams. Textbook backcountry stuff. On the morning of day 5, I found a cairn that shouldn't have been there. I was following a well-marked section of trail between 2 ponds. The path was clear, blazes were obvious, and there was absolutely no reason for a cairn. But someone had stacked about 15 rocks into a neat little tower right in the middle of the trail. Fresh, too. The rocks were still damp on the bottom where they'd been pulled from the earth. I thought it was weird, but hikers do weird things. I knocked it over with my trekking pole and kept going. That afternoon I reached a campsite near a stream crossing. There was already a tent set up. A green 1-person tent, no rain fly, positioned weirdly close to the trail instead of on the flat ground by the water where you'd normally set up. The vestibule was open. I called out a hello. Nothing. I waited a few minutes, called again, then shrugged and set up my own tent about 50 yards away, closer to the water. I cooked dinner, hung my food bag, and crawled into my tent around 7. I read for a while, and right before I turned off my headlamp, I looked out through my mesh door, toward the other tent. There was no light on inside it. No movement. No sound of someone sleeping. But the vestibule was now zipped closed. I hadn't heard a zipper. I hadn't heard footsteps. I told myself the person had come back while I was reading and was just being quiet. I slept fine. In the morning, the tent was gone. Not packed up and left early. Gone. No footprints in the soft ground around where it had been. No tent stake holes. No compressed grass where the floor had been. The ground looked completely undisturbed, like nothing had ever been there. I stood in that spot for a long time, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of it. I decided I'd imagined it, or myth. The woods can mess with your head when you're alone for days. I packed up and hiked on. On day 6, I found another cairn. Same style, same fresh rocks, same placement right in the center of the trail. I didn't knock this one over. I walked around it quickly and picked up my pace. That evening I was setting up camp at a site near a pond when I noticed something on a birch tree about 20 feet from the fire ring. Someone had carved into the bark. Not initials or a heart or a date, a telly. 5 vertical lines crossed through with a diagonal. 1 set of 5. I touched it. The cuts were fresh, the exposed wood still white and damp with sap. 5 days. I'd been on the trail for 5 days. I want to tell you I stayed. CALM? I didn't. My hands were shaking while I cooked dinner. I set up my tent, got inside, and sat with my back against my pack, holding my knife. I didn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on the pine needles and dead leaves around my campsite. Not an animal. Animals don't walk in circles. These footsteps made a slow, wide loop around my tent. 1 full circle, then another. Then they stopped, right outside my tent door. I held my breath. I could see the mesh panel of my tent door, and beyond it, just darkness and the faint outline of trees. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear breathing. That same controlled, quiet breathing, like someone standing there, deciding what to do. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like 20 minutes. It was probably 3. Then the footsteps started again, moving away from my tent. Back toward the trail. Slow, unhurried. I didn't move until dawn. When the sun came up, I packed my bag faster than I've ever packed anything in my life. I checked the perimeter of my campsite. There were footprints, boot prints, larger than mine, making 2 clean circles around my tent. They came from the direction of the trail and went back the same way. I hiked out. I skipped the rest of my planned route and took a side. Trail that connected to a logging road. It added 12 miles, but it got me to a road where I eventually flagged down a truck. I reported it to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. They said they'd make a note of it. I checked online forums for weeks afterward, looking for anyone who'd had a similar experience in that area. I found one post from 2 years earlier about a hiker who'd found freshly stacked cairns on an unmarked section of the 100-mile wilderness. They never posted again. I still hike, but I don't hike alone any more than I don't hike in Maine. I want to tell you something that happened to me, but I have to be careful. I can't name the host or post the listing, because I can't prove what I'm about to say. By the time I tried to show someone, the evidence was gone. So all you have is my word, and I need you to decide if you believe me. In March of last year, my girlfriend and I booked a weekend getaway to Bodega Bay, California. If you've never been, it's this quiet, moody town on the Sonoma coast. Famous as the setting for Hitchcock's movie, The Birds. We wanted somewhere low-key. We'd only been together about 8 months, and this was our first real trip. The Airbnb listing looked perfect. It was a detached guest house behind the owner's main property, just a 5-minute walk from the beach. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a rustic but clean vibe. The photos showed weathered wood siding, a bright red front door, and a pretty view of the sand dunes. The host had over 40 reviews, and every single one was glowing. We booked it instantly. We arrived on a Friday evening. The host, a man in his 60s named Gene, met us in the driveway. He seemed friendly, gave us the keys, showed us how the space heater worked, and pointed out the path to the beach. His own house was about 100 feet away, mostly hidden by a row of tall cypress trees. He told us to text if we needed anything, then left us to it. The guest house was exactly as advertised. It was a little chilly, but once the heater kicked in, it felt cozy. We unpacked our things, made some pasta, opened a bottle of wine. Later, we walked down to the beach in the dark and just listened to the waves crashing. It was perfect. Exactly the escape we had been hoping for. The next morning, my girlfriend went to take a long shower. I was in the kitchen, hunting for coffee filters. The cabinets were pretty bare, but I finally found some in a drawer next to the fridge. As I was digging around, My fingers brushed against something hard at the very back. It was a small, black rectangle. A USB flash drive. Now, normally, I wouldn't think anything of it. People leave things in rental properties all the time, but finding it hidden away like that, it felt strange. It sparked my curiosity. My girlfriend was still in the shower, so I grabbed my laptop and plugged the drive in. The drive contained folders. Dozens of them. Each one was dated with a month and year, going back about 3 years. I clicked one at random aghast, 2024. Inside were video files. I held my breath and clicked on one. My screen filled with an image of the very bedroom I was staying in. Our bedroom. The footage was shot from a high angle, like from a camera mounted near the ceiling. It was dark, filmed in night vision, which gave everything that eerie, green-gray tint. The video showed a couple, fast asleep in the same bed my girlfriend and I had slept in just hours before. They were just sleeping. The video file was 4 hours long. My heart started pounding. I clicked on another file, from a different month. A different couple. Same high angle. Same bedroom. Same ghostly green footage of people sleeping, completely unaware. I opened a third. This one showed a woman, alone, reading a book in bed. A fourth showed 2 men watching a movie on a laptop before turning off the light. There were so many files, months and months of them, all recorded from that same hidden spot inside the bedroom of the guest house I was sitting in. Slowly, I looked up. I scanned the kitchen ceiling, then walked into the bedroom and stared up at the ceiling there. I couldn't see anything. No obvious camera, no weird holes, no tiny red light. But the angle in the videos. It pointed to the corner near the closet, right above the dresser. I moved the heavy dresser away from the wall and looked up. There was a smoke detector in that corner. It looked completely normal. But when I stood on the dresser and shone my phone's flashlight right up to it, I saw it. The small gap in the plastic housing where the sensor is was just a little wider on one side, just enough for a pinhole lens. I didn't touch it. I got down, pushed the dresser back, closed my laptop, and slipped the flash drive into my pocket. When my girlfriend came out of the shower, all I said was, "We need to leave." Now, she saw the look on my face and knew I wasn't joking. I waited until we were in the car, driving away, to tell her what I'd found. She wanted to call the police right away. I did too, but I just wanted to get as far away from that property as possible first. We drove to the Bodega Bay fire station, not knowing where the nearest police station was. They directed us to the Sonoma County Sheriff's substation. I handed them the flash drive and told them the whole story. They seemed to take it seriously and sent a deputy out to the property that same afternoon. But later that day, the deputy called me back. He said they had inspected the guest house and found no cameras. He said the smoke detector was just a regular smoke detector. Jean, the host, had been cooperative and acted completely confused, and the flash drive. The deputy told me the files on it were corrupted. He said they couldn't open a single one. But I know what I saw. My girlfriend knows I saw something. The listing is still up. I just checked it last week. Jean has 52 reviews now. I think about the people in those videos. I think about the woman reading her book alone in that bed, lit up in green night vision, having no clues someone was watching her private, quiet moment. I check the listing about once a month. I don't really know why. Maybe I'm hoping one day I'll see a bad review. Something that confirms I wasn't crazy. Some other guest who happened to open the wrong drawer. Or look a little too closely at the wrong smoke detector. But the reviews just stay positive. Charming cottage. Loved the walk to the beach. Jean was a wonderful host. My girlfriend and I are still together, but she won't let me talk about this anymore. She says it gives her nightmares. The thing is, I have nightmares too. Not about what I saw on that drive. My nightmare is about the fact that I slept in that bed for a whole night before I found it. It's about what Jean might have on a different flash drive, hidden in a different drawer, that nobody has found yet. We never went back to Bodega Bay. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. I've been a truck driver for 14 years now, mostly doing long-haul runs across the Midwest and the Plains states. In all that time, I've seen some truly weird things out on the road. I'm talking about dead animals the size of a small car. People walking on the shoulder at 3 in the morning wearing nothing but their boxer shorts. I even saw a sedan driving the wrong way down I-80 once, with no headlights on. You just learn to keep your eyes on the road, your hands on the wheel, and keep on rolling. But something happened to me near Oglala, Nebraska, back in November of 2025. It asked the one thing I coo-hoon, just file away under road weirdness and forget about. I was hauling a load of frozen chicken from a plant in Council Bluffs, Iowa, to a distribution center in Denver. It's a run I'd made probably 60 times before. I-80 west across Nebraska is one of the most boring stretches of highway in the entire country. It's flat, it's straight, and at night, there is absolutely nothing to look at but your own headlights and the occasional overpass. I left Council Bluffs around 7 in the evening. The plan was to drive straight through to Denver, just stopping for fuel and coffee. I hit North Platte around midnight and pulled into a Pilot truck stop. I fueled up, got a large black coffee, used the restroom, checked my tires, and was back on the road by 12:20. West of North Platte, I-80 gets even emptier. You might see another truck every 10 or 15 minutes, but passenger cars are pretty rare after midnight. It was a clear, cold night, no wind, about 20 degrees out. My cab was warm, and I had some AM station playing country music on the radio, fading in and out. Around 1 in the morning, I was near mile marker 331, somewhere between Oglala and Big Springs. That's when I noticed a vehicle parked up on the right shoulder, about a quarter mile ahead. As I got closer, I could see it was a white van. No lights on, no hazards, just sitting there. I didn't think much of it at first. People pull over for all kinds of reasons. But as I passed it, I glanced in my side mirror and saw something that made my stomach just drop. The van's headlights flashed on the exact instant I passed it. Not a second later. The very instant, like someone was sitting there in the dark, just waiting for me. The van pulled out onto the highway right behind me. It started slow, then it accelerated fast. Within a minute, it was right on my tail. So close that I could barely see its headlights in my mirror, because they were tucked right up under my trailer. Now, tailgating is annoying, but it's not unusual. I just maintained my speed at 63 and waited for them to pass me. They didn't. They stayed right there on my tail for 5 miles. Then 10 miles. Then 15. I decided to slow down to 55, hoping they'd get the hint and go around. They slowed down with me. So, I sped up to 68. They sped up too. They matched every single change I made within a second or two, like we were tied together with a rope. After about 20 minutes of this game, I got on my CB radio. I put out a call. Any drivers westbound on I-80 near mile 315. I've got a white van riding my tail. Anyone else seeing this? Silence. Nobody answered. The channel was completely dead. I tried again. Still nothing. I picked up my phone, thinking about calling 911, but what was I going to say? Someone is driving behind me. That's not a crime. I felt kinda stupid even thinking about it. So I just kept driving, hoping they'd get bored and leave. Around mile marker 290, the van suddenly backed off, and I don't mean it slowed down gradually. It went from being 6 inches off my bumper to maybe a quarter mile behind me in just a few seconds, like it had slammed on its brakes. I watched it in my mirror, this little white rectangle getting smaller and smaller, and I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me. But then, its headlights turned off. The van was still there. I could just barely see it in the glow of my own taillights. This pale, ghostly shape on the highway behind me. It was still moving, still following, but now completely dark. That's when I got genuinely scared. Driving with no lights at 70 miles an hour on a pitch-black highway. That isn't road rage. It isn't impatience. That is something else entirely. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher I had a vehicle following me with no lights on, westbound on I-80 near Big Springs. She said she'd send a state trooper. I told her there was no way I was stopping to wait. She told me to just keep driving, and they would try to intercept. I drove for another 30 minutes with one eye glued to that mirror. I could still see the van every now and then, catching faint reflections off its windshield whenever we passed under an overpass light. It stayed back, always about a quarter mile away. Never closer, never farther. And then, it was just gone. Between one overpass and the next, it vanished. There were no exit ramps in that stretch of road. It just wasn't there anymore. I kept checking my mirrors for the next hour, all the way into Julesburg, Colorado. I finally pulled into a rest area, locked the doors, and sat there in my cab with the engine running until the sun came up. A state trooper called me around 6 in the morning. He said they'd driven the whole stretch I described and found no white van. No vehicle matching that description was registered to any address within 50 miles of where I'd been. He asked me if I was sure about what I'd seen. I told him I was 14 years sure. I've made that Council Bluffs to Denver run twice since then. Both times, I've taken I-76 south through Sterling instead of staying on I-80 past Ogallala. It adds about 40 minutes to my trip. I don't care. I am not driving past mile marker 331 at 1 in the morning ever again. A few weeks later, I told another driver about it at a truck stop in Cheyenne. He got real quiet, and then he asked me, was it between North Platte and Big Springs? I said yeah. The thing that still keeps me up at night about this story isn't what happened. It's how long it was happening before I even noticed. I'm a 34-year-old woman, and I live alone in a 2-bedroom house in a quiet subdivision. It's one of those boring neighborhoods with a homeowners association that elves send you a letter if your grass gets too long. I bought this house back in 2022, right after my divorce. It was supposed to be my fresh start, you know? My safe place? My life is incredibly predictable. I work as a dental hygienist, Monday through Thursday, from 7:30 to 4. I leave my house at 7:10 every single morning and I'm back home by 4:20. Every Friday, I'm off. I usually do my grocery shopping in the morning and spend the afternoon cleaning the house or just watching TV. It's a routine, and I like it that way. But in January of 2026, things started to get weird. Just little things at first, things I dismissed for way too long. The very first thing was a kitchen chair. I have this small, round table with 4 chairs in my kitchen. When I left for work one Tuesday morning, I know all the chairs were pushed in neatly under the table. When I came home that afternoon, one was pulled out. Not by a lot, maybe just 6 inches. It was just enough to look like someone had recently sat in it. I told myself I must have bumped it on my way out and didn't realize it. I mean, that's reasonable, right? People don't memorize the exact position of their chairs. A few days later, I came home and my TV was on. It was just showing a blank blue screen, like it had been turned on but wasn't set to any input. I live alone. I don't have any pets. I always turn the TV off. But again, my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd accidentally hit the remote with my bag when I grabbed it off the couch that morning. Things like that can happen. The next week, It was something in the bathroom. I keep my toothbrush in a little ceramic holder on the right side of the sink. I came home on a Wednesday, and it wasn't there. It was on the left side of the sink, not in the holder, just lying flat on the counter, with the bristles pointed toward the wall. That one really stuck with me. You can explain away a chair or a TV, but a toothbrush doesn't just move itself across a sink. I stood there in my bathroom, just staring at it for what felt like a long time, desperately trying to come up with a logical explanation. I couldn't. That night, I checked every single door and window in the house. Everything was locked. The deadbolts were thrown, the chain was on the front door, all the windows were latched shut. I even checked the garage, locked. I looked in all the closets, under the beds, behind the shower curtain. There was nothing, no one. I barely slept that night. A full week went by with nothing else unusual happening. I actually started to relax. I was beginning to think maybe I'd just been stressed out, my imagination running wild. Then I came home on a Thursday and I smelled cologne. It wasn't my perfume. It was definitely a men's cologne, something kind of woodsy and sharp. The smell was strongest in the hallway between my bedroom and the bathroom, almost like someone had just walked that path very recently. The scent faded within an hour. That was it. The very next day, I called a locksmith and had every single lock in the house changed. New deadbolts, new knob locks, a new garage code, everything. I also bought a Ring camera for my front door and a cheap little Wise camera that I set up in the living room. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The cameras showed absolutely nothing. No one came to my door. No one entered my house. I started to think I really had been paranoid. That the chair, the TV, even the toothbrush, they all had some normal, boring explanation I just wasn't seeing. The cologne. It probably just drifted in from a neighbor's dryer vent or something. I had almost completely convinced myself that I was just going crazy. Then, on a Friday morning, the one day I don't go to work, everything changed. I was sitting in my living room at about 10:30, just having a cup of coffee, and I heard a sound from the back of the house. It was a click. A very specific, very familiar click. It was the sound of my back door's deadbolt turning, and then I heard the faint squeak of the door opening. I completely froze. I was sitting right there on the couch, coffee cup in my hand, and I couldn't move a muscle. I heard the door close, very softly. Then I heard footsteps in the kitchen. They were slow, quiet footsteps on the tile floor, the kind of footsteps someone makes when they are trying not to be heard. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath. I wasn't breathing. My phone was on the kitchen counter, which was in the exact direction of the footsteps. My front door was about 15 feet away, to my left. I sat there in total silence for what felt like an eternity. Then the footsteps started again, but faster this time, going back toward the kitchen door. I heard the door open and close. I heard the deadbolt click again, locking the door. The second I heard that click, I bolted. I ran to the front door, yanked it open, got outside, and called 911 from my neighbor's front porch. 2 police officers came within 10 minutes. They searched the entire house, and they found the back door locked. Deadbolted. Whoever had come in had a key. A key to my brand new locks, the ones I'd had installed just 2 weeks earlier. The police checked my Wise camera footage. But here's the thing about those cheap cameras. The one in the living room was pointed directly at the front door. It didn't cover the kitchen or the back hallway at all. Whoever had been coming into my house knew exactly where that camera was. They came in through the back, stayed in the kitchen where they couldn't be seen, and left the same way they came. The camera caught nothing. The officers took my statement and told me I should probably go stay with someone for a few days. I went to my sister's house. When I came back, I had a full, professional security system installed. I'm talking cameras on every door, every window, motion sensors inside the works. I also called the locksmith who'd changed my locks. I asked him if anyone else had requested a copy of my keys. He said no. He said the only copies he made were the ones he'd given directly to me. I then asked if he had made any extras for himself, for any reason. He paused. It was just for a second, but there was a definite pause before he said no again. That pause, that 1 second hesitation, I think about it constantly. I moved out 3 months later. I couldn't take it anymore. I sold the house at a loss. I live in a big apartment complex now, one with a doorman and security cameras in every single hallway. I still sleep with the lights on. I know that probably sounds dramatic. But someone was in my house, probably dozens of times, while I was at work. They knew my schedule. They had a key. They moved my things just enough for me to notice, almost like they wanted me to know they were there, like it was some kind of game. And when they finally came on a day I was home, they didn't panic and run. They just calmly walked away, locked the door behind them, and disappeared. I never found out who it was. The police never followed up. And I still, every single day, wonder how long it was really going on before I started noticing. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing for more. Stay safe out there. My kids don't know about this. They were only 4 and 6 at the time, and they slept right through the whole thing. My wife and I, we made a pact never to tell them. But it's been almost a year now, and I just... I need to get this out. I need to tell someone. So, last June of 2025, we rented a lake house on Lake Ouachita in Arkansas. It was supposed to be our perfect family vacation for a week. The place belonged to an uncle of a family friend, so we got a really good deal on it. It was pretty remote, about a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, Mount Ida, and set way back from the main road on this big 2-acre lot that just sloped right down to the water's edge. The setup was idyllic. There was a private dock with a little blue motorboat tied up on one side and a swim ladder on the other. The house itself was a classic A-frame, 3 bedrooms, with this big, beautiful, screened porch that overlooked the lake. Honestly, it was the kind of place you see on Instagram and dream about. And for the first 3 days, it was exactly that dream. The kids were having the time of their lives in the water. We grilled burgers, took the boat out for rides, even caught a few fish. I threw them back because, let's be real, I didn't feel like cleaning them. My wife, she just relaxed on the porch and managed to read 2 entire novels. We were genuinely happy. I remember that feeling so clearly, that perfect contentment, probably because of what happened next. It was the 4th night, a Wednesday. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning. I've always been a light sleeper, and something had definitely woken me up, but I couldn't figure out what. I just laid there in the dark, listening. The bedroom window was cracked open, and all I could hear were the normal night sounds of a lake, croaking frogs, the buzzing insects, the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock. Then I heard it, a different sound, a scraping sound. It was coming from the direction of the dock. It sounded like something really heavy being dragged across the wooden planks. I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed out to the screened porch. The moon was nearly full, casting this bright, silvery light over everything, and I could see the dock perfectly. The little blue boat was there, just rocking gently in the water. There was nothing on the dock itself. Nothing I could see, anyway. I stood there, watching for a few more minutes, but the sound didn't come back. I finally convinced myself it was nothing and went back to bed. The next morning, Thursday, I went down to the dock to check on the boat, just to be sure. That's when I saw something I had been able to see from the porch in the dark. There were scratches on the dock planks, and these weren't little scuffs. They were long, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone had dragged something with sharp, heavy edges all the way along it. They ran the entire length of the dock, from the shore all the way to the very end over the water. And they were fresh. The wood inside the cuts was still bright, white, and splintered. Then I found something else. A single boot print in the mud right at the base of the dock, where the grassy bank meets the soft clay. It was pressed deep into the ground, like whoever made it was carrying a serious amount of weight. The boot was big, and it had this really distinctive tread pattern on the sole. Looked like some kind of heavy-duty work boot. I went back up to the house and told my wife. Her immediate reaction was to call the property owner. I, in my infinite wisdom, told her I'd handle it, and then didn't call anyone. She was right to be mad at me about that later. In my head, I figured it was just someone from a neighboring property, maybe taking a shortcut or using our dock at night. I know lake people can be a bit territorial, but sometimes they're also just oblivious about where one property ends and another begins. So that night, Thursday night, I decided to stay up. I sat on a chair on the screened porch, in the dark, with all the house lights off, and just watched the dock. My wife went to bed around midnight, and the whole house fell silent. I just sat there, waiting. At about 1:15 in the morning, I saw it. Movement. Right at the edge of the trees, along the right side of our property. A figure stepped out of the woods and started walking toward the dock. They were moving slowly, very deliberately, and they were hugging the brush line, trying to stay in the shadows. They were dressed in dark clothes, and from that distance, I couldn't make out their face at all. They stepped onto the dock and walked all the way to the end. They just stood there for a minute, looking out over the dark water. Then, they turned around and looked directly at the house. My heart just stopped. I don't know if they could actually see me. The porch was dark, and the screen probably offered some cover, but they just stared at the house for what felt like an eternity. I didn't move. I don't think I even breathed. My phone, of course, was inside on the nightstand. It never even occurred to me to bring it out with me. Finally, the person turned back towards the lake. They knelt down and reached into the water, and then they pulled something out. It was dark, and it was heavy. You could just tell by the way they strained. It was about the size of a large duffel bag. Water was just pouring off of it. They heaved it onto the dock, stood up for a second to catch their breath, and then picked it up again, slinging it over their shoulder. Then, just as they came, they walked back towards the tree line and disappeared into the woods. Gone. I just sat there on that porch, frozen, for at least another hour. They didn't come back. The next morning, I went straight down to the dock. There was a large wet patch at the end where they'd set the thing down, and fresh, wet footprints on the planks. In the mud by the shore, there were new boot prints, with the exact same distinctive tread pattern I'd seen before. This time, I called the property owner. No hesitation. I told him everything. He was adamant that nobody should have been on the property. He said the lots on either side of the house were completely undeveloped. There was literally no one living within a mile of that place. He said he'd drive out and check on things himself. He showed up that afternoon. We walked the property line together, and sure enough, he found a narrow, hidden path cutting through the brush on the right side of the lot. It led from the road above, all the way down to the water. Someone had clearly been using it regularly. The brush was all trampled down, and there were more of those same boot prints in the dirt. Then he took the motorboat out to check the lake right off the dock. He came back a few minutes later and told me that about 15 feet from the end of the dock, there's a shelf where the lake bottom suddenly drops off into deep water. He said you could easily set something on that shelf, and it would be just under the surface, completely invisible from above. We left that day, a day early. There was no argument from my wife. I didn't put up a fight. It was an unspoken agreement. We just packed our things and got out of there. The owner said he was going to set up some trail cameras and have a diver check that underwater shelf. I gave him my number and I begged him to call me if he found anything. He never called. I tried calling him, twice in July, once in August. He never picked up. He never called me back. Finally, in September, I sent him a text, just asking if he ever found anything. He responded with a single word. Nothing. I don't believe him. Not for a second. I keep replaying that night in my head. I keep thinking about the shape of that thing they pulled out of the water. It was heavy, it was dark, and it was roughly the size and shape of something I really don't want to think about. We didn't go back to Lake Ouachita. This year we went to Gulf Shores for our vacation. I never told the kids why we changed our plans. They'll probably never know. Thanks for listening. If you have any similar stories, I'd honestly be interested to hear them in the comments. And if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing. I appreciate you all. I need to be careful how I tell this story, because if I tell it the wrong way, it sounds like a ghost story. It's not a ghost story. I'm almost sure of that. What I'm not sure of is what's worse, what I thought was happening, or what might actually have been happening. My grandfather died in February of 2025. He was 91 years old, and he lived his last 30 years completely alone on a 60-acre property just outside of Grinnell, Iowa. This is deep in corn and soybean country, land that's as flat as a tabletop. His nearest neighbor was a good half-mile down a long gravel road. He was stubborn, fiercely independent, and absolutely refused to even consider moving to assisted living. My mom, bless her heart, would drive out to check on him once a week, making sure he had what he needed. When he passed, he left the entire property to me. I live in Des Moines, which is about an hour's drive east, so it wasn't too far. My wife and I drove out on a Saturday in March to start the daunting task of going through his things and trying to figure out what to do with the place. The farmhouse itself was a 2-story white frame house, built back in the 1940s. It had a classic wraparound porch, a big detached barn, and a root cellar about 40 feet from the back door, built right into a low rise in the ground. The cellar had this old, heavy wooden door with a rusted padlock on it. When we stepped inside the house, it was like walking into a time capsule. Everything was exactly how Grandpa had left it. There were dishes in the sink. A half-finished crossword puzzle was sitting on the kitchen table, with his reading glasses resting right on top of it. Seeing that, his glasses just sitting there, that hit me harder than the funeral ever did. It was so final. We spent a few hours sorting through the main floor, but we decided to head home before it got dark. The emptiness of the place was a little overwhelming. The next Saturday, I came back alone. My wife had a work commitment she couldn't get out of. My plan was to tackle the upstairs bedrooms and start boxing things up. It was a gray, overcast day, probably 40 degrees out, and it was quiet in that unique way that only rural Iowa can be quiet. There's no traffic noise, no neighbors making a sound. All you can hear is the wind whistling through the bare trees and the occasional call of a crow. I was working in my grandfather's bedroom, going through the clothes in his closet, when I found a key. It was hanging on a small nail, tucked away behind his heavy winter coats. It was a small, old-fashioned key, and it had a little piece of masking tape wrapped around it. In his familiar, shaky handwriting, it just said, RC, Root Cellar. I'd never been in the root cellar. Not once. When I was a kid, Grandpa always told me it was full of spiders, and that I should never go down there. And as an adult, I honestly just never thought about it. But now, the property was mine. I needed to know what was in every single structure on the land. So, I took the key outside and walked over to the cellar door. The padlock looked ancient and was covered in rust, but when I put the key in, the lock turned smoothly, almost like it had been oiled recently. That seemed a little odd. The door itself was incredibly heavy, and as I pulled it open, a wave of cold, Damp air just washed up from below. Stone steps led down into the darkness. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and cautiously started making my way down. The cellar was much bigger than I expected. It was about 15 feet by 20 feet, with rough stone walls, a hard-packed dirt floor, and thick wooden beams supporting the ceiling. Along the walls were old wooden shelves, all of them holding dusty canning jars filled with who knows what. It was all pretty normal root cellar stuff. But then, in the back corner, I saw it. There was a cot, a small, foldable camping cot with a sleeping bag laid out on it. Next to the cot was a plastic milk crate, turned upside down to serve as a nightstand. On top of the crate was a battery-powered lantern, a worn paperback book, and an empty coffee mug. The sleeping bag was unzipped, as if someone had just gotten out of it. I reached over and pressed the button on the lantern. It turned on immediately, casting a bright, steady light. The batteries were full. I just stood there, staring at this little setup. My grandfather was 91 years old. He could barely make the walk to his own mailbox at the end of the driveway. There is absolutely no way he was sleeping in a root cellar. There was no way he was navigating those steep, uneven stone steps every day. Someone else had been sleeping here. I started backing up slowly toward the stairs, my heart starting to pound in my chest. As I did, the beam from my phone's flashlight swept across the wall opposite the shelves, and that's when I noticed marks in the stone. Scratches, but they weren't random. They were tally marks. Little groups of 5, with a line crossed through 4. I started counting them. There were 47 groups of 5. That's 235 marks. If each one of those marks represented a single night, that was almost 8 months. 8 months? Someone had been living down here? I scrambled up the stairs as fast as I could, slammed the heavy door shut, and relocked it. The click of the padlock felt very final. The first thing I did was call my mom. I asked her, trying to keep my voice calm, if Grandpa had ever mentioned anyone staying on the property. A friend, a handyman, anyone? She said no, absolutely not. Then I asked if he'd ever mentioned the root cellar for any reason. She said he never talked about it, ever. My next call was to the Poche County Sheriff's Office. A deputy came out on Monday morning. I met him at the property, gave him the key, and told him what I'd found. He went down into the cellar by himself. A few minutes later, he came back up and confirmed everything I'd seen. The cot, the sleeping bag, the lantern, and the tally marks on the wall. He said there was no real way to determine who had been staying there, or even when they'd left. There was no personal property, no ID, no spare clothes, just the cot and the few items on the milk crate. But he also found something I had missed. Behind the shelves, wedged between 2 old canning jars of what looked like beets, there was a small spiral notebook. He brought it up and showed it to me. I opened it, and inside were pages and pages of handwritten notes. At first, I thought it might be a diary, but it wasn't. They were observations. Each entry started with a date and a time, followed by brief, precise notes. Things like left house 2:15 p.m., returned 3:40 p.m., or lights off 9:30 p.m. Another one said, daughter visited, stayed 2 hours. That one sent a chill right through me. That was my mom. Someone had been living in my grandfather's root cellar, just yards from his back door, and meticulously documenting his daily routine. The entries went back for over a year. The last entry was dated 3 days before my grandfather died. The deputy took the notebook as evidence. I never heard anything else about it from the sheriff's department. I sold the property in May. I couldn't bring myself to go back. I never went into the root cellar again. I didn't even go back inside the house. I hired an estate sale company to handle everything, to just clear it all out. What I can't stop thinking about, what keeps me up at night, is the timing. Whoever was living in that cellar, watching him, they stopped writing 3 days before Grandpa died. Not the day of, not the day after. Before, it's like they knew it was coming. Like they had been waiting for something, and their watch was finally over. My mom says I'm reading too much into it. She says it's just a creepy coincidence. She reminds me that Grandpa died of heart failure, which he did. The death certificate is very clear on that. But someone was there, on his property, in his root cellar, watching him, for at least 8 months. And they vanished right before the end. I don't know who they were. I don't know what they wanted. And I'll probably never know if my grandfather had any idea they were there. He never said a single word. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe for more stories. I've been a registered nurse for over 9 years, and almost all of that time was spent on the night shift. I've seen things. I've watched patients take their last breath, held the hands of grieving families, and witnessed events that would make most people run screaming from the healthcare profession. But this story isn't about any of that. This is about one night in a small, rural hospital that I still can't explain. And believe me, I have tried. I'm not going to give you the name of the hospital or the town. All I'll say is that it's in eastern Kentucky, in a county so small that some apartment buildings in Lexington have more residents. The hospital itself is tiny, 42 beds, a small and no ICU. If you get really sick, you get a helicopter ride to a bigger city. At night, the staffing is minimal. Just 2 nurses for the whole floor, 1 aide, an ER doctor, and a security guard who mostly just watched videos on his phone in the lobby. It was March of 2025, and I was on my usual 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. I was assigned to Ward C, which had 12 beds. That night, it was quiet. Only 5 of those beds were occupied. We had a pretty standard mix of patients, 2 people recovering from surgery, an elderly gentleman with pneumonia, a woman we were monitoring after a fall, and a teenage boy with appendicitis waiting for a morning transfer. Around 11 o'clock, I did my rounds. Everything was calm. All my patients were stable, either sleeping or resting quietly. The ward was peaceful, with the hallway lights dimmed down low. The only sounds were the soft, rhythmic beeps of the monitors and the old heating system clanking every now and then. It was a typical, uneventful night shift, or so I thought. At 12:30, the call light for bed 7 switched on. Now, this was strange because bed 7 was empty. It had been for 3 days, ever since we discharged the last patient. The room had been cleaned, the bed stripped down to the bare mattress. There was nobody in there. Of course, call lights can malfunction. It happens all the time in older hospitals. So, I walked down the quiet hall to bed 7's room, went inside, and switched the light off at the wall panel. The room was dark, the bed was bare, just as I expected. I turned off the light, closed the door, and went back to the nurse's station, thinking that was the end of it. Then, at 1:15, it happened again. The call light for bed 7 lit up the board. I let out a sigh, a little annoyed now, and walked back down that long, dim hallway. I went into the room and turned off the light again. This time, I decided to investigate a bit. I checked the wiring on the call button itself. It was plugged into the wall socket correctly. To make sure it didn't happen again, I unplugged it completely. I pulled the cord right out of the wall and coiled it up on the bedside table. Problem solved. There was no way that light could go on now. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the call light for bed 7 went on for a 3rd time. My blood ran cold. I had unplugged it. I knew I had. I distinctly remembered pulling the cord from the wall and leaving it on the table. I walked down to the room, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I pushed the door open. The call button cord was plugged back into the wall. It was stretched from the socket to the bed rail, with the button hanging in its normal position, exactly where a patient would expect to find it. It was as if someone had walked in, plugged it back in, and carefully placed it there for use. I just stood in the doorway, scanning the dark room. The bed was empty. The visitor's chair was empty. I looked into the attached bathroom. The door was open, and it was dark and empty inside. The window was shut and locked. There was no one there. I didn't hesitate this time. I walked in, unplugged the call button again, but this time I took the entire cord with me. I carried it back to the nurse's station and locked it in one of the drawers. I turned to Jackie, the other nurse on duty, and told her what was happening. She just rolled her eyes and said the wiring in Ward C was ancient, probably 100 years old, and it must have a short somewhere. Logically, that made sense. I wanted to believe her, so I tried to put it out of my mind and went back to my charting. At 2:45, something new happened. The main monitor at the nurse's station suddenly started blaring a vitals alert. It was coming from bed 7. Now, this wasn't a call light. This was a vitals alert. That kind of alarm only goes off when a patient is physically connected to the monitoring equipment, and their heart rate or oxygen level drops to a critical low. But there was no patient in bed 7. There was no monitoring equipment in bed 7. The room was supposed to be completely empty, the bed not even made. I looked at Jackie. Her face was pale. She looked back at me, her usual skepticism gone. "That's just a glitch," she said, but her voice was shaky. I shook my head. "That's not a glitch, Jackie." She stared at the monitor, then at me. "Go check," she said. Honestly, I didn't want to. Every instinct was screaming at me to stay put, but it was my job. So, I started that long walk down the hall again, towards bed 7. Through the small glass window in the door, I could see the room was dark. My hand was trembling as I reached for the handle. I pushed the door open and flipped on the light switch, and I froze. The bed was made. It was perfectly, immaculately made. Crisp white sheets, the top one folded down neatly, the pillow plumped and centered. It had perfect hospital corners, the kind of expert bait-making our aides do when they're preparing a room for a new admission. But no one had prepped this room. I had personally been inside it 3 times in the last 2 hours, and each time it was a stripped, bare mattress. I just stood there, paralyzed in the doorway. A profound coldness washed over me, and it wasn't a draft from the old building. It was a heavy, chilling cold, like the air itself had a weight to it. My eyes darted around the room. I looked at the perfectly made bed, and then my gaze fell on the call button box on the wall. The cord, the very same cord I had locked in a drawer at the nurse's station, was plugged back in. I didn't even go fully into the room. I turned and walked, almost ran, back to the station. I yanked open the drawer where I'd put the cord. It was empty. The cord was gone. For the rest of that shift, neither Jackie nor I went back to bed 7. We didn't even have to discuss it. It was an unspoken agreement. We just did not walk to that end of the hall. We did our rounds on our other 5 patients. We answered their calls, but we stayed as close to the well-lit nurse's station as possible. At 6 in the morning, the sun started to rise, and the day shift began to arrive. The ward felt a little less menacing with more people around. I grabbed Tammy, the day charge nurse, and asked her to come with me. We walked back to bed 7 together. I opened the door. The bed was stripped again. A bare mattress, no sheets, no pillow. The call button cord was unplugged, coiled neatly on the side table, exactly where I had first left it hours before. It was as if the last few hours had never happened. I told Tammy everything. I expected her to laugh or dismiss it, but she didn't. She just listened patiently, nodded, and when I was finished, she said, "That room does things sometimes." I asked her what she meant. She just shrugged and said, "People have complained before. I just stopped assigning patients to it. and that was all she would say. The next week, I asked Secuan to pull the camera footage from the Ward C hallway. The video showed me clear as day, going into the room at 12:30, 1:15, and 2 o'clock. At 2:45, it showed me going back again and just standing in the doorway for a full minute before rushing away. But there was nothing else. No one else entered or left the room. It was too dark inside to see the state of the bed on the camera. The footage explained nothing. I transferred to a different hospital 4 months later. The official reason was a shorter commute and better pay, and that was true. But I'd be lying if I said that night in bed 7 did UNT play a big part in my decision. I've asked other nurses who used to work there. At least 3 of them have their own strange stories about Ward C. None of them want to talk about it publicly, and honestly, I can't blame them. Something is in that room, or something happens in that room, and I have a strong feeling that the hospital administration knows it. To this day, from what I've heard, they still don't assign patients to bed 7. Thanks for listening. If you have any stories like this, I'd love to read them in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more strange tales from the front lines of healthcare.